This hour on Inside Islam.
It is not surprising there are Muslims who take on the name of Isa, Jesus, out of respect and love for Jesus. It's no different than Muslims taking on the name of Musa. Musa means Moses. Moses is a great prophet. We love Moses. How many here tonight named Moses? Musa. Ah, ha, ha. So there's no doubt about it. Muslims love and respect Jesus. They name their children after him. They name themselves after him. They name themselves after his righteous mother.
That was Imam Siraj Wahhaj preaching to the faithful at the Al-Taqwa Mosque in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome to Inside Islam on Here on Earth, Radio Without Borders, from Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm Jean Faraka. This hour, the Muslim Jesus. Does it surprise you to learn that Jesus and Mary are revered by Muslims? If you are Muslim, what image of Jesus did you grow up with? If Jesus is so revered in Islam, why don't Muslims celebrate Christmas? Is the Muslim Jesus a bridge between Christians and Muslims, or a source of tension? To join the conversation, call 1-877-GLOBE-07, 1-877-456-2307. Send an email to hereonearth@wpr.org. To leave a message on our blog, go to insideislam.wisc.edu. Dr. Suleiman Murad is a professor of religion at Smith College and the author of a number of books on medieval Islamic history and religious thought. Among other areas, his research focuses on the presentation of Jesus and Mary in the Quran and Islamic tradition. Suleiman Murad joins us from the studios of Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Dr. Murad, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome to Here on Earth.
Good afternoon, Jean. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor.
This is such a fascinating topic. I mean, we've been studying Islam for several years now together on the radio. And it wasn't until I started looking into this whole topic that I began to realize what a central role Jesus plays in Islam. He has many names. He is known as Isa, as the Son of Mary, as the Messiah, as the Word, as the Spirit of God. What role, in your words, does Jesus play?
Indeed, you can sum it up in any better way. Jesus, or Sayyidina Isa, as we say in Arabic and the Islamic tradition, plays a very key role. The one important thing that one has to remind the listener, both whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims, is that Islam comes out of a lineage of messages and prophecies and scriptures that were communicated between God and his followers, the monotheists, and subsequently it is a kind of a condition, a prerequisite, without which Islam cannot be understood or cannot make sense. So Islam did not come to reinvent the wheel. It came at the top of a line of religions. And why Jesus in particular plays a key role in the Islamic tradition, it is precisely because he was one just before the Prophet Muhammad. And it's always the one before who plays a role in your legitimacy. You expect that that figure is going to prophesy your coming. Therefore, one of the main purposes that Jesus plays in the Islamic tradition is that he legitimizes, or at least the Islamic tradition believes that he pronounced that and prophesied that a messenger is going to come after him, who is the Prophet Muhammad. And there are other things as well that make Jesus, in a sense, a unique or a super prophet, so to speak, in that he also plays a role at the end of time. And that's only Jesus among all the prophets who has that double duty, so to speak. A duty when he came to communicate the message from God, and the duty that he has to complete his mission, so to speak, at the end of time, on Judgment Day.
We know that Muhammad, of course, is seen as a prophet, but what makes Jesus a super prophet?
I don't want to intend to mean that there were no other super prophets, but just to give you some kind of background here, Solomon, biblical Solomon, is a prophet in the Islamic tradition. King David is a prophet. John the Baptist is a prophet. There are also women prophets as well, such as Mary. Some of the wives of the biblical patriarchs are believed to be prophetesses in one way or another. So there is the regular prophet, who is someone who is some kind of a warner to people, someone who reminds them of the importance of worshipping the monotheistic God. And this line of prophets, or this category of prophet, is different from the messengers, who bring, alongside what a regular prophet brings, they bring also a scripture, a revelation. And the Islamic tradition acknowledges 4 such revelations. Technically there are 3, but there is a reference to a 4th one that confuses scholars a lot. Obviously these are the commandments to Moses, hence Moses becomes a super prophet. The Gospels to Jesus, hence Jesus becomes a super prophet, and the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, which makes him also a super prophet. So here you have 2 categories of prophethood that the Islamic tradition acknowledges. And in this way, we are clear here talking about Jesus being a prophet rather than the Son of God. So the Islamic tradition honestly goes out of its way to emphasize the humanity of Jesus. And therefore, when Islam refers to Jesus as a prophet and as a messenger, it puts him at the highest echelon that a human being can actually achieve.
And it's interesting that he occupies in Islam a kind of equivalent position that John the Baptist occupies vis-a-vis Jesus in the Gospels, in that he prophesies his coming. He is a kind of forerunner. He is also seen as an ascetic. He rejects the world and its pomp, and he seems to be very much like the John the Baptist that Christians are most familiar with.
You are completely right. The Islamic Jesus looks a lot like the Christian John the Baptist, or the image of John the Baptist in the Christian tradition as being this severe ascetic. You are right, he plays this role of forerunner. So part, at least in the Gospels, of the legitimization of Jesus as the Messiah, as the Son of God, comes from the mouth of John the Baptist. When he is about to baptize Jesus, he says, "This is the one," acknowledging that this is the one that Israel is expecting. But obviously he gives it, at least as the Christian tradition is concerned, he gives it this tone that this is not a regular human Messiah, this is the Son of God being baptized. So yes, the Islamic tradition comes to think of Jesus along the same lines as the Christian tradition thinks of John the Baptist. Very much Jesus is an ascetic. Sometimes he's very austere, someone who really renounced the world, everything in the world. I can tell you an anecdote that is reported in the literature.
Oh yes, please.
That once there was this exchange between Jesus and his disciples, and that's a kind of trope that always appears in the literature, that Jesus is teaching those disciples. Often they seem not to understand exactly what he's talking about, so there's this kind of anxiety in the exchanges, but he's always there to tell them and show them how they should go about living their life. So once he told them, you will not gain God's bounty until you wear coarse wool with joy, eat barley with joy, and make the ground your bed with joy. So when it's not simply to do these things, but do them with joy. So
that sounds like St. Francis of Assisi.
Yes. And honestly, you can go even way back to some very austere figures in the early church period, people like St. Anthony, in Egypt, and some of the early
the desert fathers.
The desert father, exactly, who wandered around, often lived in isolation and in very, very austere ways. Barely some little food. I have this anecdote from a famous Egyptian monk who actually chastised another monk for soaking his lentils. It's like, you want now to eat your lentils with sauce. And obviously probably that poor monk didn't have any teeth to chew these lentils. But that was too much for the elder monk to tolerate. So you see that there are lots of models in early Christianity about this austere asceticism. And here, actually, it segues to something important about why Jesus not simply plays a role, but it seems that his role keeps growing in the Islamic tradition. Definitely the case in the medieval period, is that he becomes the model, the symbol of particular ways of life. So asceticism, especially austere asceticism, any type of setting, any type of saying, any type of anecdote that people repeat, invokes the image of Jesus, and hence often he becomes the author of these sayings and these kind of practices, even though he might not actually have had anything to do with them.
I see. So he becomes a kind of symbolic figure representing certain values, certain virtues.
Exactly. And here you have a culture, the Near Eastern culture, so rich in so many things relating to wisdom, relating to different types of practices, being secular or religious. And in the particular case of asceticism, Jesus becomes the reference point. So whenever you say something, you don't know who said it, the image that comes to your mind is Jesus, and therefore he becomes the author. Mm-hmm. And just imagine how rich that the Hellenic, the Pharaonic culture, the all Near Eastern culture, ancient culture, biblical culture, all of this being recycled, the attitude toward asceticism, and invariably attributed to Jesus. So the lore that revolves around him being an ascetic becomes pretty much huge in the Islamic tradition.
He also is known for humility and for piety, for the love of God.
Indeed. And there are some prophets who had special relationship with God. Everybody has special relationship with God, but some were selected to receive a little bit more of a treatment of closeness to God. For instance, Moses had this encounter with God on Mount Sinai that elevates him in terms of endearment to God than others. Abraham hosted God at one point, according to the biblical tradition. The Prophet Muhammad had this encounter with God on his ascension to heaven. And in many ways, we don't have particular narratives that speak of similar experiences for Jesus, but then when you look at the Quran and the way he singles out Jesus to call him the Spirit of God and then the Word of God, those are not expressions used for any other prophet. So you feel there that there is some kind of selectiveness that Jesus is being presented within.
We're talking this hour about the role of Jesus in Islam. My guest is Dr. Suleiman Murad, professor of religion at Smith. We are at 1-877-GLOBE-07, 1-877-456-2307. The email address is hereonearth@wpr.org. Does this come as a surprise to you to learn that Jesus, and Mary for that matter, are revered by Muslims? We haven't talked very much about Mary yet, but in the Quran she is held to the most exalted spiritual position among women. She's the only woman mentioned by name in the Quran, and there's a whole chapter devoted to her. Does it surprise you? Why don't we know about this, we Christians? And if you happen to be Muslim, what image of Jesus did you grow up with? If Jesus is so revered in Islam as a super prophet, why don't Muslims celebrate Christmas? And if we find that Jesus and Mary are held in common between these two great Abrahamic faiths, Can we see that as a bridge or as a source of tension? 1-877-GLOBE-07. 1-877-456-2307. I'm Jean Faraka. You're listening to Inside Islam on Here on Earth.
They said, "How can we talk to one who is in the cradle, a young boy?" He spake, "Lo, I am the slave of Allah. He hath given me the scripture, and hath appointed me a prophet, and hath made me blessed wheresoever I may be, and hath enjoined upon me prayer and almsgiving so long as I remain alive, and hath made me dutiful toward her who bore me, and hath not made me arrogant, unblessed. Peace on me the day I was born, and the day I die, and the day I shall be raised alive." Such was Jesus, son of Mary. This is a statement of the truth concerning which they doubt. It befitteth not the majesty of Allah that he should take unto himself a son. Glory be to him. When he decreeth a thing, he saith unto it only, "Be," and it is.
That's Sheikh Mashari bin Rashid al-Afasi reading from Surah 19 in the Quran, which describes the birth and early life of Jesus. I'm Jean Faraka. You're listening to Inside Islam on Here on Earth, Radio Without Borders from Wisconsin Public Radio. My guest this hour, Dr. Suleiman Murad, is professor of religion at Smith College. His area of research focuses on the presentation of Jesus and Mary in the Quran and in Islamic tradition. Dr. Murad, tell us about Surah 19. Is this Maryam's surah?
Indeed, that's how the Quran identifies it, as the Surah Maryam. And it's not the only place where actually there is a reference to Mary. There are other places where Mary is mentioned. And in this particular case, the Annunciation of Jesus is being proclaimed. The chosenness of Mary to receive the word of God and conceive of a boy who will go on to be the prophet of God, and his name would be Isa. That's the chapter 19 of the Quran. There is a similar, almost identical Annunciation story in chapter 3, Surah Al Imran. And there, it's not only Mary that is mentioned in the context of the Annunciation of Jesus, but her Annunciation is being proclaimed as well. It's the selectiveness of her entire lineage, that is the family from which she comes from. So in at least two chapters in the Quran, chapter 3, Surah Al Imran, and chapter 19, Surah Maryam, we see this kind of distinctiveness, this selectiveness of Mary to carry the new prophet who is going to go on to proclaim revelation from God.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the Muslim Jesus is remarkable for his humanity, not his divinity. But in that surah, what we are hearing is the infant Jesus, the boy Jesus, I'm not sure which, speaking from the cradle. So this is a very special human.
First, he's special human because he is conceived without any male human interference. God sends the angel and tells Mary that she will conceive, and she doubts. How am I going to conceive if I'm if I didn't have a relation with a man? And the angel tells her, God can do this. And so this is where you see first how Mary is a special person being selected in this particular case for something extraordinary, as that, and for Jesus' conception and birth of equally being something extraordinary. But then if you read chapter 19, Surah Maryam, in the light of chapter 3, where her mother receives essentially the same thing, her mother doubts, I'm very old here, and my husband is very old, and I'm here being told by this angel that I'm going to be carrying a girl who's going to be distinguished from all humankind. Al-Alamin, the reference in Arabic, she's distinguished, she's chosen from all of humankind. So in chapter 3, even Mary comes out as an extraordinary human being there.
There's so much to talk about here. We have callers. I don't want to lose them. Maria is joining us from Milwaukee. Hi, Maria.
Hi. So I just wanted to call referring to a comment you asked about Muslims celebrating Christmas. And, as a child, we were born and raised, me and my siblings, in America. My parents came from India, and they didn't really celebrate Christmas. But I think it's something that is kind of changing with a lot of the Muslims that are raised here. I know when we were younger, we would tell my parents, we believe in Jesus as well. Why can't we celebrate his birthday? And then after that, we've continued to celebrate. And another comment I wanted to make is I have a lot of Christian friends, and obviously growing up in America, a lot of Christians, and I've always tried to make a point to say, we do believe in Jesus, we do believe in Mary. Like, my name is actually Maria, and it's just the Arabic pronunciation of Maria. So obviously there's a lot of reverence that goes into Mary. But I think there's a little bit of hesitance because you don't want to offend any Christians when you say, we don't see Jesus as God, we see him as a prophet, and we don't want any Christians to feel that's offensive, that we hold him in a different standard as they do. So I think that kind of impedes the understanding. And also, unfortunately, there's so much media and publication about Islam, but it's not really the actual religion in the practice. It's more just, what sets us apart from the other religions are fanatical Islam that's really broadcasted.
And can I ask you, how do you celebrate Christmas?
We have a tiny little Christmas tree. We do the presents exchange and all that. So it's a very watered-down version of Christian.
Well, I'm so glad you called. Thank you so very, very much. It's just amazing to me how much we have in common. First of all, we've talked about the Annunciation. We've talked about the belief that Elizabeth also conceived miraculously. We have the virgin birth. We have Jesus as a kind of, to use your term, the Word, the Spirit of God, the super prophet, the Messiah. He's also known as the Messiah in certain instances. We have the ascension of Jesus. We have the second coming. But we don't have the crucifixion or the resurrection.
Actually, we have the resurrection. There is an issue in the crucifixion of Jesus in the Quran that essentially the majority of Muslim scholars read it as a denial of the crucifixion. And subsequently it became almost an Islamic dogma that Islam does not subscribe to the crucifixion of Jesus. But if you go and examine the Quran to that particular case, and I did actually recently a research paper on this, on the particular question of whether Jesus was crucified in the Quran or not. It's in chapter 4, verses 157, 158. And if one really reads it closely without taking into consideration Islamic polemics, that is, accusation that the whole issue of Jesus' crucifixion is a fabrication, if you take that out and you read closely what the text of the Quran says, it says at the end, but God raised him up to him. The issue that is at stake in this particular two verses of the Quran is that possibly here you are talking about the Prophet Muhammad and his followers being at odds with the idea that God would leave a prophet to receive such a treatment, being crucified, without ever coming to help that person. So if God resurrects someone from death, then that person is not dead. which is an argument that the Quran makes several times, but not in relation to Jesus only. It's in relation to those who die waging, in a way, kind of struggle against the enemies of God.
I'm so glad to hear you say this, because I've been in my, in my preparation for this conversation with you, I came across a reference that there's even a story which reproduces Jesus' last prayer on the cross, and another where Jesus affirms to a man in a dream that he was indeed crucified. So what you're telling us, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that this was suppressed. And just as there are Christian beliefs that are intended to separate Christians from Muslims, there are, as you put it, Muslim polemics, Islamic polemics, that are intended to do the very same thing.
Indeed, and in a way, at least this is, if I were to say, this is my own argument on this, it's clear that there were very important early Muslim scholars who said Jesus actually died on earth and God resurrected him from death. So that argument was there. You are right to say it was suppressed. It was. But that's one has to consider what was happening for something like that to be suppressed. And it's clear that not necessarily at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, it was probably a century after that, this heightened polemics and accusations between Muslims and Christians created animosity between the two groups that essentially influenced each one's perception of the other. And in this particular case, the mindset of lots of Muslim scholars was not of tolerance to, in actual life there was tolerance, but there wasn't tolerance in terms of scholarly engagement and scholarly conversation. So they suppressed all these things that any indication that Jesus could have died here, that he could have been crucified but then resurrected from death. They suppressed that and they focused on anything that proves Christianity wrong. So that became the framework that essentially informed lots of later scholars. Is we always think of Jesus and Christianity from the context of who is right and who is wrong here. And something that you raised before the break is if we were to move as two communities out of this deadlock, we need to go a little bit before that kind of polemical exchange that took place often as intellectual curiosities, but it ended up shaping the two traditions' perception of each other.
Okay. Let's hear from John, who joins us from Wapaka next. Hi, John.
Hi. A lot of the symbolism and dates for Christmas and Easter coincide with the pagan holidays that were combined with Christianity. I'm wondering if that's the reason that honoring Jesus means that they don't celebrate these, because of the mixing of the pagan symbolism and dates.
That's an interesting question.
First, we need first, the most important thing is to look at, Islam flourished in the Middle East to a large extent, where you have Oriental Christians, and for the most part, the Oriental Christians didn't either celebrate Christmas. Christmas, to a large extent, is mostly a Western European tradition, very strong in that respect. The Eastern Christians focus more on Easter, the symbolism of the crucifixion and rise of Jesus and then ascension to heaven. So the whole passion, this is where the key focus is. And it depends on what Muslim community you talk about. For instance, in Lebanon, lots of Muslims partake in that kind of celebration of rebirth. Whether they believe in the Christian dogma about Jesus or not is beside the point. It's the fact that, for instance, I grew up in a house of extremely religious family, and my grandmother celebrated Easter. We do always we boil eggs and color them. We know that this is not a pagan practice. We know that this is a celebration of the rebirth of Jesus in some way. But more importantly, there is another important holiday that some Muslims celebrate, and that is the baptism of Jesus, which coincides with what in the Western tradition do celebrate as Epiphany. In the Islamic tradition, this is the day when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And I know from my grandmother, she makes sure that the next day's bread that she is going to bake, she prepares and she hangs out on a tree, because the belief is that all the trees will bend down on that night in kind of because of the holiness and significance of that night, except the two cursed trees, the mulberry tree and the fig tree.
Oh,
those were, the
what
fig tree was
happened to
cursed
the mulberry tree?
I don't know about the mulberry in particular, but that's believed in my village and in parts of Lebanon.
Is it? Where did you grow up?
In a village in South Lebanon, which was predominantly the area around us is predominantly Christian. There are some minor Islamic presence, like probably 30 to 70%.
But there's something I don't understand. You said you celebrate the baptism of Jesus, but then you mentioned Epiphany. In the Christian tradition, Epiphany is otherwise known as Little Christmas, and it's supposed to be the day on which the Magi, the three kings, came to find Jesus where he was born and to worship him. But the baptism of Jesus is actually not a festival. It's just
not a festival in the Western Christian tradition, but in Eastern Christian tradition, this is in Arabic we say Laylat al-Amadi. This is when Jesus was baptized. And my grandfather, my mother does the same thing. There is a special sweet that is done that night, where you have to. It's made of it's dough that you boil. That you fry in oil that symbolizes baptism. And my father is born on January 6th, so I know pretty much that in a way that sweet is being done in remembrance of the baptism of Jesus that lots of Oriental Christians in the Near East celebrate. The Epiphany, again, it's part of a different tradition that is connected with Christmas more so than. So when we talk about what Muslims commemorate in one way or another, one has to take into consideration where in the Muslim world you are talking about, because in some places people tend to be more celebratory about religious holidays than other places. Some might be more strict in their observance of what particular, even Islamic religious holiday is acceptable and what's not. So it changes according to cultural context and exposure.
We have a tweet from Adam in Madison who writes, I learned in my Arabic classes that Muslim reverence for Jesus is now a placating move, and all my Muslim friends agree. How would you respond?
Placating in a negative sense?
In a negative sense. In other words, we believe in Jesus just like you do. And this is just to placate Christians. Yeah. It doesn't sound that way to me from what you're telling us.
Again, it's if you are coming from a polemical approach, you want this to be a source of tension. You want to say it's our word against your word. It's in the Quran or in the Islamic tradition, Jesus is human, whereas in the Christian tradition, he's the Son of God. The Muslims assert this, the Christians assert this. So in a polemic context, things become complicating, becomes
adversarial, unnecessarily
exactly.
adversarial.
And therefore, if you partake in any kind of celebration of any symbolism that relates to Jesus, becomes as if you are partaking in symbolism that is Christian, that is condemnable, and you should abstain as a Muslim from that, and the opposite would also apply.
Is what you're telling us considered very controversial inside Islam?
It depends, again, where inside Islam. In some parts, yes, it would be very controversial. It's because the polemical mindset holds sway, holds very much power. So even in some cases where you would hear some imams say that Islam celebrates Jesus and honors Jesus, etc., but still it's taken as a defiance of Christianity, as a confirmation that Christianity is wrong. So it's taken as a polemical celebration rather than as a celebration of openness and tolerance.
We're talking about the Muslim Jesus this hour with Dr. Suleiman Morad, who is professor of religion at Smith College. I'm Jean Faraka. You're listening to Inside Islam on Here on Earth, Radio Without Borders from Wisconsin Public Radio. So does this open up a whole new possibility of convergence between Christian understandings of Muslims and vice versa? Or is this troubling to you as a Christian, troubling to you as a Muslim? We're at 1-877-GLOBE 07, 1-877-456-2307. It seems to me that it might depend upon what the historical and social context is, because we are in a period where Christians and Muslims are forced apart, that this idea that we hold Jesus in common might be something difficult to accept. Does it seem that way to you? 1-877-GLOBE 07, 1-877-456-2307. Can we agree to disagree? And what are we disagreeing about? Email address is hereonearth@wpr.org. Don't forget you can leave a message for us on our blog. That's insideislam.wisc.edu. And you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Just go to Here on Earth Show. I'm Jean Faraka. You're listening to Inside Islam on Here on Earth, Radio Without Borders. Jesus was a healer, and his miracles of healing are credited in both the Gospels and in the Quran. In the Masnawi, which is Rumi's epic poem, dialogues, he talks about this aspect of Jesus. From all sides, people gathered around his house. Some were blind, some lame, and some insane. Each morning they went to his door so that their defects could be healed by Jesus' breath. Jesus, that man of the good path, would say his prayers and would come out, seeing many groups of sick and weak people sitting and waiting at his door of hope. Jesus would say, "Oh, the stricken ones, God has granted your needs and cures." The people would then walk with no pain and trouble toward the blessings and mercy of the divine, like the camel whose chains were lifted from their feet. The people would walk freely and joyfully toward home. They all were cured by the prayers of Jesus. So this is, I guess you'd call it extra canonical. I'm not sure what the term would be in Islam, Dr. Masood, but Rumi's Masnawi, his poems were created in the 13th century, I think. Much later than the Quran itself.
Yes, Rumi's flourished in the 13th century. So 7 centuries after the Quran or so. But the Quran in chapter 3, Surah Al-Imran, already speaks about Jesus' peculiar gift as empowered by God to cure the leper, to cure the sick, to revive the dead. All was God's empowerment and God's permission.
We have Michael joining us from Oshkosh. Hi, Michael.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call.
Oh, I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to emphasize on how special Jesus really is. Because I know I have never read the Quran, and so I give your guest a lot of respect. But I've been a Christian ever since I've seen the 10 Commandments. I've always wanted to worship that same God that Moses worshipped. Just briefly, this is what Jesus says in his diary before he came to the earth. He says, Jehovah himself produced me as the beginning of his way, the earliest of his achievements of long ago, when he has yet not made the earth. That's what makes Jesus really special.
Okay, and what are these diaries? I've never heard of the diaries of Jesus before he came to earth.
This is at Proverbs, the 8th chapter, starting at verse 22.
Okay.
And it goes all the way around, and it's Jesus' words before he came to the earth.
And is there anything in that content, Professor Musad, that Muslims would have a problem with?
In some ways, the Islamic tradition would definitely have an issue here, because the pretext that the caller is talking from assumes Jesus' divinity, and that's where you would run into problems. The particular case about whether we are talking about the Quran or the early message of Prophet Muhammad or the Islamic tradition, for the most part, is this excessive protectiveness of God, that there is no way that there is a possibility to tolerate any assumption, any indication that God might have partners, that even when you think of partners that sum up to one unit, still the illusion that Jesus could be a son of God, could be part of a trinity, that for the Muslim mind, for the majority of Muslim scholars, is something that's not tolerable. And this is where the tension would be.
And that's very interesting, because in the Jewish tradition, there is very absolute strict monotheism as well. But on the other hand, I think it was the Prophet Muhammad who said that the Christians were the closest to Muslims. So why did he say that? On what basis?
The things that we don't know much about Christianity in Arabia at the time. This can mean several things. It can mean that they are closest because they are the most recent version, just before this new movement of Islam, that they have already instituted, this is a reference in the Quran, certain practices that make them less attached to this world. But in the context of, say, outside the Quran, in the context of the early Islamic tradition, there seems to be some kind of rapprochement, some kind of good relationship between the Prophet Muhammad and his community in Medina and the Christian community in Najran in southwestern Arabia. And it could be that explains why the Christians are singled out in particular, and not the rest of the monotheists.
Oh, yes. I think I came across an allusion to the fact that there was a certain point in Muhammad's life when he was concerned about the welfare of his followers, and he sent them to a Christian, to be protected by a Christian king.
So, this is even another case. Actually, they went to what's today Ethiopia, to the historical Abyssinia, across from Arabia, across the Red Sea from Arabia, where they were sheltered by the king of the Abyssinia for some time. And so that was a crucial period when the Prophet was still in Mecca, when he was under tremendous kind of persecution. At least his followers were under some kind of persecution, that they needed that protection. So in these two cases historically could explain why the Quran emphasizes on the Christian as being closer to the Muslims.
I see. Marty joins us next from Milwaukee. Hi, Marty.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm really having fun. How about you?
Very interesting topic. I just want to say I'm a Christian, and in no way in any part of this do I find offensive. I'm a strong believer that in God's house there are many, many rooms. And I believe that when and if I'm lucky enough to get to heaven, I hope to meet many of my Muslim brothers and sisters there. So God bless. That's just all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the call, Marty. You can meet a lot of your Muslim brothers and sisters while you're still here on Earth. And you know what's coming through to me in this conversation is that I think probably in early Christianity, in early Islam, before things really got technical before the boundaries between one and another. I think this is true of Judaism and Christianity as well, that there was a lot of porosity, I guess that's the right word. After all, the earliest Christians were actually Jews, and I know that in Muhammad's lifetime, Christians and Jews and Muslims all interacted. So maybe these beliefs were less solid at a certain time, and these were all mutually influenced by one another. Is that possible?
Indeed, and we need to be in some cases more of historians and scholars than religious defenders, because precisely what you allude to is something that happened in early Islam when in the first essentially 70 years or so we see a lot of ambiguity about the definition of belief and who is a believer in Islamic writing. Whether we find it in material culture, in inscription, on coins, on papyri, and whatever. And what comes through more and more, this conviction that the early Muslims saw themselves as members of a larger community of believers that included Christians and Jews. And subsequently, what the previous caller, Michael, said, which is extremely important here, is for a period of time, the Muslims looked at their monotheistic siblings as equal. And here I want to bring back this notion of sibling, that often if someone sits on the sideline and looks at siblings playing, sometimes fighting, he might consider, wait a minute, these can't be siblings. Look how they are fighting, how they are screaming at each other. But that's part of the terrain, competition over attention of the parent, for instance. So often we mistake this anxiety, this kind of eagerness on the part of each member of this community of believers to receive the complete attention of their father, and we mistake this as being open animosity. And there are historical moments where the animosity perpetuates tendencies toward aggressiveness. For instance, in the age of the Crusades, when Muslims and Christians from Europe were killing each other, that perpetuate lots of negativity between the two sects. In early Christianity, there were some issues between some Jewish community and some Christian community that you could see them reflected, for instance, in the Gospel of John in particular. Many people think of it as the most anti-Semitic, but actually it's not really anti-Semitic. This is the most Jewish of all the Gospels because of the condition of that community that was being separated from its larger community. So there is tremendous cohesion, if you want to say, in terms of the origin, in terms of the commonality between the three monotheistic traditions, that what lots of practitioners sometimes want to admit. And often because we are put in a mindset where we become extremely jealous, we want to defend, and that process of defending often gets us into the problems of attacking the other.
We have Hadi joining us from Madison next. Hi, Hadi.
Hi, Gina. Sorry to get to come late. I just want to say that we don't do this enough, to point out the commonality and the Abrahamic faith. We all pray to the same God. Even George Bush said that to the Shia when Sistani in Iraq, when they were fighting. We all pray to the same God. And I want to throw this challenge out there. I want to see the Jews going to Mecca to see that to pray to the Kaaba where Abraham and his son, whichever it is, Ishmael or Isaiah, I don't care at this point, to be able to go to Mecca and to get access to the Kaaba. And the same thing to Jerusalem, where the Jews pray to the wall there, just let the Muslim go there, because they are praying to the same God. There is no doubt about that. So let's let's try it. Let's push towards that. More interconnection.
Thank you, Hadi. It's a great way to end the hour. I really appreciate your call. Dr. Murad, you were wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a great honor for me, Jean, to be on your program. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. You'll find links to Dr. Murad when you visit our website at hereonearth.org. You can also visit our Inside Islam series website at insideislam.wisc.edu. And you can continue today's conversation on our Inside Islam blog. Just go to insideislam.wisc.edu, where you'll find recent posts on the pillars of Islam, comedy as a medium for breaking down stereotypes, and the controversy over the TLC reality show All American Muslim. All that on insideislam.wisc.edu. Thanks to Joe Hartkeep, our technical producer, to Laura Zimmerman, our webmaster. Judith Sears-Persson took your calls today. Nayantara Mukherjee produced today's show in collaboration with Global Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and with funding from the Social Science Research Council in New York. I'm Jean Faraka. Thanks for listening.